very warm welcome to Political Economy with Shweta Punj. Well, Bihar is set to have a new government very soon, and the state stands at a critical juncture in its economic trajectory. The state, referred to as a Bimaru state, has experienced a remarkably high economic growth rate in recent years, which reached approximately 23% last year. The challenge, of course, now is for the state to actively push its growth agenda to translate growth into prosperity and jobs. The challenge, of course, becomes more daunting because of the many promises that have been made by the new government. Well, I have with me Chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, noted economist and former Member of Parliament, Dr. NK Singh, to discuss the challenges and opportunities for the new government in Bihar. Dr. Singh, thank you so much for joining us. Bihar is your home state, and I want to get in your first thoughts on the results that we've seen in Bihar, the politics that we saw play out in Bihar. All manifestos focused on job creation this time around, and yet there were a whole host of freebies also that were in the offing.
Yeah, I think that two or three things, Sweta, are very apparent. First and foremost, Bihar has, in a very, very decisive way, opted for continuity and trust. It has opted for continuity and trust because one of the unique characteristics of this arrangement in the NDA of both JDU and the BJP acting in tandem has had decisively experienced a multiplier effect in terms of the quality and efficiency of infrastructure. Bihar has experienced that in the last few years. Bihar has also experienced that the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, with the support of Chief Minister Nitish Kumar, has really paid importance to macroeconomic stability, to financial planning, and to ensure really that when both the center and the states act in congruity, it's a shining example of what Prime Minister has called Team India. Team India in a working federal model. So I think that the first thought is that the sagacity of Bihar voters, notwithstanding the fact that economically they are among the more impoverished states, its per capita income of Bihar is at the bottom of India's per capita income. And you can see, therefore, that in spite of that, as you correctly pointed out, in the last few years, Bihar has experienced a very high rate of GDP growth. And incidentally, if I may say so, Sweta, there are several decades where demography in Bihar was high, growing at close to 3%, 3.1%. Per capita income was scarcely growing at 1%, considering low rates of growth of GDP. In sharp contrast to that, as you pointed out, the current year itself, Bihar's per capita income, given the growth rate, and the fact that demography is now at about 1.3, 1.4%. So with demographic advantages now being there, at much lower rates of growth, with high rates of growth of GDP, per capita income is likely to grow close to about 10 to 11%. It has grown for the last 2 years. If it continues at the same pace for a decade, the power of compounding being what it is, it will double its per capita income in less than 10 years. And that is why millions of Biharis have come out of extreme poverty and are beginning to join the growth trajectory for Bihar's quest to become and join at the lower end of a middle income state in India, and then eventually bridge the gap between the faster growing states and Bihar.
Dr. Singh, thank you for that very detailed, insightful account of Bihar's growth trajectory. Because for someone who's on the outside, for instance, me, when I look at Bihar, it's difficult for me to fathom or get my head around the fact that there has been growth in Bihar, because, like you said, that in terms of per capita income, Bihar continues to be the lowest. So this has been 19 years of Nitish Kumar government in Bihar, and clearly there has been a change in the state. Now that we see Mr. Kumar taking on and leading the new government again, Dr. Singh, what, according to you, should be his first priority, when it comes to enthusing the young people of Bihar, when it comes to getting the private sector to invest more robustly in Bihar?
So I think that I've written about it in public domain, but let me repeat 4 or 5 things which, in my view, are very important. First and foremost is to adhere to security and trust, the 2 important guiding factors. The second important guiding factor must be attention to overall macroeconomic stability. Bihar's finances, contrary to what people expect, is better managed than many other states in India. If we look at, for instance, the debt to GDP ratio in Bihar, it is far more manageable than some of the more advanced states. I do not wish to name them. But Bihar has managed its finances somewhat more efficiently and somewhat more carefully and with somewhat more thriftily in terms of 2 factors. Its deviation from the targets of both debt and per capita income are not as unmanageable as some of the other states. Second, I think it has undergone a tectonic shift in terms of the composition of the public expenditure, whereas a good part of the public expenditure does go in what may be called revenue expenditure by payment of salaries and pensions and other committed expenditure. But over the last few years, capital expenditure has had a fundamental shift. Increasing proportion of overall expenditure is going towards capital expenditure. Third, I think, as you pointed out, that the symmetry between central government and Bihar government acting in tandem has seen vastly greater. I don't know when did you travel, Sweta, on the roads in Bihar. Please experience now the roads in Bihar. This will be a new experience. Please experience to give you an example, the new airport which has come up, with 2 more airports coming up. Bihar's air connectivity has improved so dramatically. Can you imagine? I never imagined that Darbhanga would have Pune, Patna, the airport, then the bigger airport in Patna, several other airports. Air connectivity, rail connectivity, road connectivity has changed very, very decisively in the last few years. What does all this mean? If historical experience is any, it opens the great possibility of private investment. What do you need to do for attracting private investment was a very important question which you posed. And if you like to interrupt me now, I will be, but I would like to dwell on what are some of the steps which are necessary for private investment to get incentivized.
Yes, Dr. Singh, if you could talk a little bit more about that, on getting the private sector, because like you said, that the state has been consistently working on fixing its law and order, infrastructure creation and so on. But now I think the finishing piece of the Bihar growth, economic growth conundrum or puzzle would be the private sector creating jobs in the state, perhaps even opportunities that incentivize the youth of Bihar to stay back and contribute towards the growth of their state rather than traveling out of the state to find lucrative employment opportunities.
So let me first begin in a slightly lighter note, if I might, Sweta, to address the last part of your question on people traveling out of the state. on this whole issue of what has been called in Bihar palayan or migration or whatever it is. Now, we must put this in a proper context. There are two types of migration. One is the pull factor, the other is a push. Push is when you are so desperate in search of livelihood that you are forced out to seek livelihood anywhere else. This is because the sustenance from agricultural activity or sustenance of whatever you could do in Bihar was so inadequate that you had no option but to go out. So, this is the push factor. The pull factor is when you do it not by compulsion, but you do it by choice. So, Bihar, if I may say so, 52% of Bihar's household receive somewhere around 40,000 rupees per annum by way of remittance income, which is not small. People forget that migration does deprive you of the advantages of making a contribution from where you migrate from. But
Right.
if you migrate, there is also this huge advantage on the remittance economy. India is the recipient of the world's biggest remittance economy in the country, goes
Right.
from China and India. Bihar receives also a very high remittance income, and this should be factored. But I totally agree with you that we need to create much greater job opportunities in Bihar. We need for this, it is necessary to improve the skill and skill education, improve pedagogy, in being able to harmonize skills to synchronize with emerging demands. Emerging demands from where? Let me give you a few examples. I do believe, Sweta, that Bihar agro and agro-processed industry, many economies of the world have sustained themselves only on agriculture, downstream processing. Bihar has this huge opportunity of the highest yield of corn, potato, in millets, in pulses. I think downstream in developing agro and agro processing. On fish, for instance, Prime Minister Modi very anecdotally pointed out in one of the speeches, if you recall, that there was a time in Bihar when people looked forward to being able to receive the next consignment of fish coming from Andhra Pradesh. Bihar now looks forward to exporting its next consignment of fish and the fish related products to other parts of India. So, and horticulture, along with proteins like in fish, have one huge advantage. The other advantage which Bihar has got, we talked about seeking job and job opportunities and creating in Bihar. Bihar has this huge advantage of concentrating what could be India's great advantage of labor intensive activity. Labor intensive in terms of leather, in terms of footwear, toy making, textiles. Bihar has a huge history. If you look at Bhagalpur's fabled textile story, it used to be the supplier of the best silks, which was the envy of United Kingdom in Bhagalpur, tuss silk. And I'll add to that one area which is a huge multiplier in my view on tourism. You
Right.
travel a lot, but I'm sure you remember that if you have traveled to Cambodia, the entire economy of Cambodia is built on only one particular, the Angkor Wat temple. That's
Yes.
adequate to sustain that economy there. Look at Bihar's legacy of the Maurya Empire, the Gupta Empire, the traditions of learning in Nalanda. The services and tourism sector in Bihar is dying at the cusp of change. What you need is, I've often come across this statement being asked, yes, of course, Nandu, we'll go and see Nalanda and we'll go and see Rajgir, but where do I stay at night? So you do require the hospitality and the hotel sector. I believe that is, say, for instance, the target could be of setting up 25 four-star, three-star, or four-star branded hotels in the to harness the tourism potential of Bihar. And by the way, statistics show that the employment coefficient from tourism is one of the highest in the country because it's low on capital, it's high on employment. And I think that concentrating on being able to harness its tourism potential has the ability to create gainful employment in a manner which few other activities can. So I've given you an example of where jobs are available: agro processing sector, in the services sector, in terms of tourism, and in terms of labor intensive forms of production and production activity.
That's I absolutely agree with you. I think these are the low-hanging fruits, specifically tourism. There is so much in Bihar that is waiting to be explored and tapped into. I also want to get your thoughts in, Dr. Singh, on the cash transfers that have been promised in this election, which across various estimates show that the outlay on cash transfers could be as much as 40,000 crores in FY26 alone, which would be about 4% of Bihar's GSDP. Now, two things. One, are cash transfers necessary, considering Bihar still continues to lag behind the other states when it comes to development and even on human development parameters? Or is this an attempt by the government? We've heard the Prime Minister talk about reveries, but would you say that these cash transfers are also like reveries, and maybe the new government should instead be focusing more on the other measures to boost growth and channeling the funds to, say, capital formation or other such long-term infrastructure creation activities rather than cash transfers? It's a unique conundrum for this new government, Dr. Singh.
So I think that three comments I briefly want to make. First of all, I think that the figures, if you want to compare between what the Mahagathbandhan had really promised, was at least 5 or 6 times higher. Say, for instance, the number of jobs they were wanting to create, the Mahagathbandhan, and what they were wanting, that had a much higher outgo of finances necessary to support this. The promises which have been made, in sharp contrast with the NDA, there has been mention of the World Bank resources being used for this. But let's not forget that there was an ongoing rural livelihood program by the World Bank. This wasn't started yesterday. This was started several years ago. And as part of the rural livelihood program, these are not unconditional cash transfers. These are cash transfers designed to improve and encourage livelihood activities of a gainful kind. That we must distinguish between, between just pure cash transfers and cash transfers for purposes of starting what the World Bank project says, encouraging rural livelihood. And I think that the kind of resources necessary, Bihar has some fiscal space which is available, which will really enable these liabilities to be discharged. Third, and most importantly, what we discussed in the earlier part of our discussion. When finances become impossible and non-sustainable, someone who has studied economics, and you have, there is a famous equation called R minus G is the critical, that R minus G means the rate of interest versus the rate of growth. If the rate of growth is significantly higher or is higher than the rate of interest, then I think that the sustainability on both the fiscal deficit and on debt is much more manageable. So the secret lies, and going back to the first part, in sustaining the kind of growth rates which Bihar has experienced in the last few years, and to continue on this effort to be able to achieve a growth rate sustained of over 10% over a period of 5 years will make an enormous difference in its overall finances and its ability not only to adhere to the commitments which they have made, but to significantly improve the life quality of an average Bihari.
Absolutely. Dr. Singh, when we talk about private investment coming into Bihar, any specific sectors, you mentioned tourism, but besides that, any specific sectors that you feel very optimistic about where Bihar would be a natural fit? For instance, Andhra Pradesh has been really pitching the state to become a renewable energy hub. We've seen the southern states also go after a lot of tech-focused industries. So are there sectors where you feel that the skills of the state that the state offers, the natural environment that the state offers, would be very well suited for a specific kind of an industry?
So let me put it this way to you. I'm sure you have not missed out on one of the commitments made of having a skilling center, a skill inculcation center at every district. This is to harness the fact, one very important fact, if you look at Bihar's educational profile, more or less access to education is now virtually over, everyone attending. But what is happening is that the dropout ratios at the higher secondary level still remain somewhat problematic. That is why if you look at the last ASER report, which is the report we all look to, you look at last ASER report, you are a bit troubled by the dropout ratios at the higher secondary level. Now, I do believe that having a skilling center at every district will enable skill inculcation in areas where the employment potential is quite high. So harmonizing the skilling with the pedagogy and with the downstream activity in the labor-intensive sectors would be exceedingly beneficial. Of course, the use of technology and what technology has to offer today in terms of altering the pedagogy. For instance, almost all schools now in India are now having artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things as part of their course study. These skilling centers will be able to also attract and improve the productivity of those who are being trained. I mean, you know that many of these higher centers of learning in many parts of the state, other states, particularly the southern states, attract a very large percentage of people going from Bihar to inculcate the skills of the time and to contribute. This can be done by having centers of education excellence located in Bihar to be able to, where the pedagogy which is offered to them, but the Biharis themselves who are going right now to seek this kind of training in other states would have enormous multiplier effects. So I think looking at the enormity of problems, but also the enormity of opportunities, I would say that it will have to be a combination of many of these things which we have discussed in the last few minutes.
Right, Dr. Singh. So what, according to you, what would you like to see Mr. Nitish Kumar focus on in the first 6 months of his new government? What are the big policy initiatives that you would want this government to really spearhead and launch as they take charge?
So I think that this is a very daunting question, Sweta, but I would certainly say 5 things. I would certainly say you need to have empowered ministerial groups or high-level groups which can be assigned the responsibility of harnessing private investment, give each of these economic departments a specified monitorable target in terms of how much private investment you have been attracted. Bihar's bureaucracy has been famous for stopping financial irregularities, can be refocused their energies in not only preventing financial abuse or financial irregularities, but specific monitorable targets in being able to attract private capital and private initiative to handholding. So that's one. The second is, can we have an investment commission, which can be perhaps chaired by the chief minister or by the deputy chief minister, which will really be to be able to attract private investment. Third, improve the absorptive capacity of capital. Each year, you do hear about, towards the end of the financial year, that financial resources which were assigned were not fully utilized. So I think then some kind of a constant monitoring of expenditure and expenditure targets, in my view, would be extremely useful. Fourth, I think that monitoring the fulfillment of commitments like opening up of the skilling sector in each district with pedagogy and assigned to the improving the technological upgradation, I would say is that. Finally, what can we do to harness tourism, the services sector, the hospitality sector with monitorable specified targets? I would say that if in the first 6 months these initiatives are taken to set up mechanisms which are monitorable, which is quantifiable, it will enable both Nitish Kumarji and the central government acting in tandem to ensure that the policies are in conformity with the commitments which have been made.
Right. The state has also been losing revenue because of its policy of prohibition, which is a big source of revenue for a lot of other states. Now, Mr. Nitish Kumar did not touch upon it in his campaign. However, his competitors did talk about doing away with prohibition. Do you see a case, Dr. Singh, of removing prohibition for the state to garner up revenues, because the view is divided on whether prohibition works on ground or not. However, having said that, we do know that women voters who seem to love Mr. Nitish Kumar hold him responsible for prohibition, and that's something that they reward him for as well.
So I think that to some extent, Sweta, you have answered the question yourself, that it's a question of balancing between revenue loss with enhanced security for women. So, in my view, the enhanced security of women is not something which should be brushed aside, or whether that policy needs any calibration or not is something for the political leadership to consider. Parts of the world have this is not the only part in the world which has a prohibition policy. There are other parts of the world which have done prohibition policy, undoubtedly with very, very mixed success. But I would say that this prohibition story, this is not the first focus. The first focus should be on enhancing growth rates, education, health, tourism, and beefing up the labor-intensive industries to attract private capital. Those should be the priority and not the particular issue.
Right. So, all the political parties, Dr. Singh, have offered jobs. Now, the Mahagathbandhan said that they will offer one government job per family. The NDA has said that they will create about 1 crore jobs. I want to understand, this electoral promise of one government job per family. Clearly, it didn't find much traction on ground. But Dr. Dr. Singh, if we were to, understand Bihar's psychology on this obsession with government jobs, and how can the Nitish Kumar government really break that? Because if we see job postings that are announced, and we'll see lakhs and lakhs of applicants lining up for, say, a few hundred jobs, and that's a very common story in Bihar. What will it take for Mr. Kumar to break that love and obsession with government jobs in Bihar?
So, I think this is an interesting story on the psychology of an average Bihari, because a government job has some benefits in terms of security of the government job over the long period, in terms of pension, in terms of other kinds of benefits which goes from government and government-related jobs. The only way you can break this conundrum, and by the way, when NDA has promised or has committed to the large number of jobs in government, far more modest than 1/10 of what the Mahagathbandhan had. Please read that along with this public jobs, it's a multiplier tenfold in terms of jobs in the private sector. So the only way you can break this is to create alternative jobs in the private sector where incomes are significantly higher. And if incomes are significantly higher, there's a multiplier activity in people being attracted away from government jobs into jobs which are much more gainful in the private sector. I ask you a simple question. I don't know whether you have traveled, but if you go to, let us say, an area which used to be part of Bihar, if you go to Jharkhand, for instance,
Yes.
I was the development commissioner of Bihar, and going to Jharkhand, going to a city like, for instance, Jamshedpur, or to in the Dhanbad, ask somebody in Jamshedpur that do you want to leave the jobs in Jamshedpur to take up a government job? Probably 60-70% would answer it in the negative that they're. So the ability of the answer lies in being able to attract credible private sector investment in the state, to have multiplier effects on job, to be able to take away what you correctly described is a current obsession with government jobs.
Right. Dr. Singh, your closing comments on the challenge of the Bihar growth story. We've outlined the opportunities, we've spoken about the priorities for the new government. What do you see as the key challenges? There's a lot of potential, there are a lot of work that's gone into it, but clearly Bihar will have to accelerate its pace of development and growth. We see states really upping the ante, as it were, on pushing through reforms, pushing through ease of doing business. You have state chief ministers who are very, very, out there in soliciting investments and so on. We don't see that so much coming out of Bihar as aggressively. If I compare, say, the Bihar leadership to, say, Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh and so on, even Delhi for that matter. So, what do you see as the key challenges here, Dr. Singh?
So I think the key challenge is to remain focused, focused on some of those things which you mentioned about, focused at the relevant policy making level in terms of sustaining these rates of economic growth, in being able to continue with the growth story of both the center and the states acting in tandem. One of the very important areas which Bihar has a huge potential, I should have mentioned, one is orderly urbanization. Bihar's, we must take up 7-8 important urban or quasi-urban growth centers to foster orderly urbanization. And construction activity has immediate growth potential, has also immediate employment potential. I like to see orderly urbanization through regulatory instruments which do not handicap, but we are able to harness. Along with this, as technology offered, you mentioned some time ago on the issues of Bihar's attention on climate, renewable energy. And I think that we should try and see that in this whole infrastructure and in terms of the construction activity, we are able to harness renewable forms of energy, or a better mix of renewable forms of better energy than concentration on the traditional methods. This is one very important area. The second area I'd like to mention, Sweta, very quickly, is Bihar's third tier, the municipalities, the urban local bodies, and the panchayats. They need definitely a degree of recalibration in a better way in terms of the delegation of the 3 Fs: functions, finance, and functionaries, which was the original intent. If a limited part, for instance, of the SGST could be given to the urban local bodies, it could be given to panchayats, for instance, to improve their finances. Because don't forget that when the great GST change took place, many of the sources of revenue of the municipalities and urban local bodies got subsumed in the state GST. There should be a mechanism where part of the state GST can be assigned to the panchayats. Also, I think that I had made this recommendation as in the 15th Finance Commission to be able to harness the great potential which property tax has. I mean, property prices have gone up in Bihar. Try and buy a piece of land in any urban pocket in Bihar. The land-man ratio is so unfavorable that property taxes have shot up in the sky. Realization of a certain quantum of revenue from property taxes, which can be harnessed to improve the finances of the third tier, would be a great way forward. I mean, if, for instance, at least 2 or 3 urban local bodies finances are improved in a manner where they can raise market borrowing, it can be a signal to the hugely, vastly improved finances of Bihar's third tier of governance. Currently, the third tier of governance is dependent on the devolution or the resources of grants of Finance Commission. This, strictly speaking, Sweta, is the obligation of the state government because it is a part or parcel of the state finance commissions which should really suggest mechanisms and ways to improve the finances of the third tier of governance. So harnessing the ability of the third tier would be another area where Bihar can take a lead.
Fantastic, Dr. Singh. Very quickly, just one outlook from you on Bihar becoming a middle-income state. What is your hope and expectation? By when do you think will Bihar be able to become a middle-income state?
So let's put it this way to you. Bihar, by the measure of, let's say, where Bihar's per capita income is today, and where, for instance, Karnataka's per capita income is today, gives you the measure of divergence, to give you an anecdotal example. So we had done some calculations. So if Bihar continues its present rate of growth of around per capita income growth of around 10-11% per annum, and if it sustains this till 2047, then by 2030 itself, the gap between Karnataka and Bihar would have substantially narrowed. If you look at the long-term growth trends, when Bihar had begun to grow in a reasonable way and had begun to bridge the gap between Bihar and UP, just then you got for 10 years, in a certain way, it's a lost decade where growth was not the focus of the government. It was overtaken by, let's put it this way, worst forms of identity politics. Now that growth and inclusive growth is the focus of the government, I do believe that continuing the present rate of economic growth for the next decade and a decade and a half would substantially bridge the gap between Bihar and Karnataka and would have brought Bihar significantly close to the neighboring state of Uttar Pradesh.
Wow, that's amazing, Dr. Singh. I'm sure people from Bihar who are watching this show would feel very, very optimistic, about the growth prospects of this state. My last question, do you also see women driving and rewriting the economic growth trajectory of Bihar, just the way we've seen women in the driving seat, where politics of Bihar is concerned?
Of course, that is axiomatic. I see the great political empowerment of women, which has received a significant boost during the Nitish Kumar government in terms of the reservation, both in government jobs, in terms of panchayats, and in terms of other layers of government. I see them that as economically they become more empowered, supported by the political empowerment, I see them play an increasingly more important role in the decision-making process, which will improve the governance matrix of Bihar. Women's empowerment has a critical role to play, not only in Bihar's growth trajectory, but in India's growth trajectory. And the area of improved productivity and efficiency of capital being utilized, women have an exceedingly important role to play in all the other areas which I have mentioned in the earlier discussion. In terms of Bihar being able to harness its great advantage of comparative factor endowment in terms of skilled labor, if they are given the proper pedagogy of skilling, in terms of the agro and downstream of agro processing industry, in capital intensive sector, in the services sector, in improved agricultural practices, which I have mentioned, some of which women have a very important role to play in being able to catapult Bihar to a prosperous Bihar. I once remember that I had said, India, mentioned it to the former Prime Minister, India cannot become prosperous till Bihar becomes prosperous. Bihar's prosperity would be a significant contributor to India's prosperity.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Singh. Very powerful observations coming in there. India's prosperity will be determined by Bihar's prosperity. It is a state that has been rewriting its growth story silently and quietly, and that is what explains the massive victory that we have seen in the state for the Nitish Kumar NDA government. Well, Dr. Singh has of course given us a lot of food for thought there, and the challenge now of course for the new government is to enthuse the private sector, to address the skilling challenge in the state, and most importantly to ensure that the ecosystem that Bihar enables attracts industry and attracts and retains talent in the state. Thank you very much, Dr. Singh, for joining us on this episode of Political Economy with Shweta Punj.
Thank you, Shweta. All the best.
And please do leave your comments in the comment section below. We'll be back next week with more on the policies shaping India.